The thread snapped with a sharp, satisfying sound as Lauren Cole finished the knot. She ran her gloved hand over the mare's flank, checking the suture line one last time. It was clean work, efficient and functional, exactly like everything else in her life. The horse, a skittish quarter horse named Duchess, let out a low huff of breath, the sedative finally wearing off enough for her to register the cold draft seeping through the barn's wooden slats. "Easy, girl," Lauren murmured, her voice steady. She didn't use the cooing, high-pitched tone most people used with animals. Animals respected calm, not performance. She stripped off her latex gloves, tossing them into the biohazard bin near the stall door, and picked up her heavy canvas coat from the hook. It was nearly 2 a.m. The isolation of the property, located miles outside the main grid of Chicago's suburbs, usually offered a heavy, comforting silence. Tonight, however, the atmosphere was different. The wind was howling against the corrugated metal roof of the barn, rattling the old beams. Lauren wasn't afraid of storms. She had weathered worse things than thunder and lightning in her 26 years. She was more concerned about the old oak tree near the driveway, and whether it would hold up against the gusts. She picked up her medical bag, a reinforced leather kit that contained everything from scalpels to heavy-duty sedatives, and stepped out into the deluge. The rain wasn't just falling, it was being driven sideways by a wind that felt personal. She lowered her head, shielding her eyes, and began the trek across the muddy yard toward the farmhouse. The house was an old Victorian structure she had bought cheap and fixed up herself, room by room. It stood alone in the dark, a single yellow light burning on the porch. Lauren was halfway to the porch steps when a sound tore through the rhythmic pounding of the wind. It wasn't thunder. It was the high-pitched, mechanical scream of rubber shredding against wet asphalt, followed immediately by the dry, popping cracks of gunfire. She froze, her hand gripping the handle of her medical bag tighter. The sounds were coming from the county road that bordered her property, a road that saw maybe 3 cars a day. The screeching grew louder, closer, accompanied by the metallic crunch of a vehicle losing control. Headlights swept across the wet grass, blindingly bright and erratic. Lauren didn't scream. She didn't have time. She threw herself to the side, landing hard in the mud just as a massive black shape plowed through her white picket fence. The vehicle didn't stop there. With a sickening, earth-shaking boom, the car flew across the yard and slammed directly into the side of her house. The impact was so violent the ground beneath her vibrated. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and the groan of compromising structural beams echoed into the night. Then, silence returned, heavy and ominous, broken only by the hissing of a radiator and the relentless rain. Lauren pushed herself up, mud slicking her jeans. Her first instinct was to check the barn, but the crash had happened at the house. The living room wall was gone. In its place sat the rear end of a black sedan, swallowed halfway by her home. She didn't run away. She ran toward it. "Hello?" she shouted, her voice whipped away by the wind. She scrambled up the porch steps, ignoring the debris littering the wood. The front door was jammed, the frame twisted by the impact. She didn't waste time trying to force it. She went through the hole the car had made. Inside, the air was thick with drywall dust, and the acrid, stinging scent of gasoline. That smell triggered a primal alarm in her brain. Fire. If that tank sparked, the whole house would go up. She climbed over a pile of bricks that used to be her fireplace. The car, a heavy armored model that looked like a tank disguised as a luxury sedan, was wedged tight. The driver's side door was pinned against a fallen beam. Lauren dropped her bag and scrambled onto the hood of the car, looking through the shattered windshield. The driver was slumped over the wheel. He was unmoving. "Can you hear me?" Lauren yelled, using the flashlight from her phone to sweep the interior. No response. She moved to the passenger side, yanking the door open. It gave way with a heavy metallic groan. The interior lights flickered on, illuminating the wreckage. The airbags had deployed but were starting to deflate, revealing the man inside. He was big. That was her first thought. Even slumped over, his shoulders were broad, filling the seat. He was wearing a black suit, the jacket torn at the shoulder, the white shirt beneath soaked in crimson. It wasn't just from the crash. She saw the hole in the upholstery of the seat, then the dark spreading stain on his abdomen. He had been shot. Lauren's mind shifted gears instantly. The veterinarian vanished. The emergency responder took over. Anatomy was anatomy, and bleeding was bleeding. She reached across the console, her fingers searching for a pulse at his neck. His skin was hot, damp with sweat, but the pulse was there. Thready. Fast. But there. "We need to get you out," she muttered to herself. The smell of gasoline was getting stronger. A hiss from the engine block warned her that time was running out. She unbuckled his seatbelt. He slumped further, a dead weight. Lauren gritted her teeth. She braced her legs against the door frame, grabbed him by the lapels of his jacket, and pulled. He didn't budge. He was solid muscle and dead weight. "Come on," she hissed, adrenaline flooding her system. She adjusted her grip, wrapping her arms under his armpits. "Work with me." With a heave that strained every muscle in her back, she managed to drag him across the center console. His head lolled back, revealing a sharp jawline and blood trickling from a cut on his temple. She didn't stop to admire his bone structure. She pulled him out of the passenger door, his legs dragging over the gear shift, and let him drop onto the floor of her ruined living room. It wasn't far enough. The fumes were dizzying. She grabbed his ankles this time, dragging him across the hardwood floor, over the debris, toward the kitchen which was structurally intact. It was grueling work. Her boots slipped on the dust-covered floor, but she didn't stop until they were past the threshold of the kitchen. Just as she dropped his legs, a loud whoosh sounded behind them. She looked back to see flames licking up the side of the car, catching on the curtains she had sewn herself. The fire was small for now, but it would grow. She turned her attention back to the man. He was lying on his back, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. Lauren knelt beside him, ripping her own coat off to clear her arms. She grabbed her medical bag, which she had instinctively dragged along with her, and snapped it open. She needed to assess the damage. She pulled a pair of trauma shears from the kit and cut through his expensive shirt, ripping the fabric open from the navel up to the sternum. The wound was ugly, a bullet entry wound on the lower left abdomen. No exit wound that she could see without rolling him over, which meant the bullet was still inside, likely nicking something vital. The blood was dark and flowing steadily, pooling on her clean kitchen tiles. "Okay," she breathed, her hands moving with practiced speed. "Pressure first." She grabbed a thick pad of sterile gauze from her bag and pressed it directly into the wound. The man groaned, a low guttural sound of pain, but his eyes remained closed. Lauren put her entire body weight behind the pressure, leaning over him, her hair falling out of its messy bun to curtain her face. "Stay with me," she ordered, though she knew he couldn't hear her. She reached for a hemostat with her free hand, preparing to clamp any visible bleeders if she had to. This wasn't a sterile operating room, and he wasn't a horse, but the principles of stopping a leak were universal. She checked his face again. He was pale, the kind of gray-white that signaled shock. His features were striking, even in this state. Sharp nose, high cheekbones, dark eyebrows drawn together in unconscious pain. He didn't look like the farmers or local mechanics she dealt with. He looked like the kind of trouble that came with a warning label. Thunder cracked directly overhead, shaking the house again. Or maybe it was the car settling into the foundation. The lights in the kitchen flickered and died, plunging them into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the fire starting to grow in the living room and the flashlight beam from her phone on the counter. Lauren didn't flinch. She kept her hands buried in the wound, feeling the warmth of his blood seeping through the gauze, coating her fingers. She checked her watch. Minutes matter, if the ambulance didn't come soon, but she hadn't called an ambulance. She realized with a jolt that in the chaos, she hadn't touched her phone except to use the light. She shifted her weight, reaching for the phone with one bloody hand while keeping pressure with the other. Suddenly, a hand clamped around her wrist. The grip was iron hard, shocking in its intensity. Lauren gasped, dropping the phone. It clattered to the tile, the light spinning wildly before settling on the man's face. His eyes were open. They were dark, almost black in the shadows, burning with a terrifying lucidity. There was no confusion in them, no haze of concussion. He looked at her with the focus of a predator that had just woken up in a trap. Lauren froze. She was used to animals waking up from sedation. They were often confused, scared, thrashing. This man wasn't thrashing. He was completely still, except for the crushing grip on her wrist. "You're hurt," she said, her voice shaking slightly for the first time. "I'm a doctor. Sort of. I'm trying to stop the bleeding." He didn't let go. His gaze traveled from her face, down to her bloody hands pressing into his stomach, and then to the burning wreck in the other room. He assessed the situation in a heartbeat. He tried to sit up, but the pain slammed him back down. A hiss of breath escaped his teeth. His hand tightened on her wrist to the point of pain, anchoring him to consciousness. "Don't," she commanded, reverting to her professional tone. "You have a bullet in your gut. If you move, you'll tear the clot I'm trying to form." He looked back at her. His eyes locked onto hers, analyzing, calculating. He saw the blood on her clothes, the determination in her jaw, the blue of her eyes wide with shock but void of panic. "Phone," he rasped. His voice was like gravel, deep and ruined. "I was just about to call 911, Lauren said, trying to pull her wrist free to reach the device. "No," he growled. The word was a command, not a request. He pulled her down closer to him, ignoring the fresh wave of blood that seeped from his wound at the exertion. His face was inches from hers now. She could smell the metallic tang of blood, the smoke, and beneath it all, an expensive, woodsy cologne. "You can't call them," he whispered, his breath hitting her cheek. "You're dying," she argued, trying to keep the pressure on his wound despite his interference. "You need a hospital, no police," he said, his eyes narrowing. It wasn't an accident. Lauren paused. The gunshots, the way he was dressed, the armor on the car. The pieces clicked into place rapidly, forming a picture she didn't want to see. "Who are you?" she whispered. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he looked past her, toward the shattered wall where the wind and rain were blowing in, feeding the fire. He seemed to be listening for something over the storm. "They're coming," he said, his voice straining. "To finish it." Lauren's heart hammered against her ribs. "Who?" He looked back at her, and the intensity of his gaze pinned her to the spot. "The men who did this." He coughed, a wet, hacking sound that brought a fleck of blood to his lips. His grip on her wrist didn't loosen. If anything, it got tighter, possessive and desperate. "Listen to me," he said, forcing the words out through the pain. "You dragged me out. You touched me. I saved your life," she snapped, fear making her defensive. "You involved yourself," he corrected darkly. His thumb pressed into the pulse point of her wrist, feeling the rapid beat of her heart. "Use your head. If they find me here. If they find you here." He trailed off as the sound of another engine cut through the storm outside. It was distant, but getting closer. A heavy engine, moving slow, searching. The man's eyes widened slightly. He knew that sound. "Is there a back way?" he demanded. "What? Is there a back way?" He enunciated every word, fighting the darkness encroaching on his vision. "The kitchen door leads to the porch," Lauren stammered. "But my truck is—" "Get me up," he ordered. "You can't walk," she refused. "You've lost too much blood. If I stay here, I'm dead," he said. "And if you're standing here when they walk through that door, you're dead too." The bluntness of the statement hit her harder than the wind outside. She looked at the door, then back at him. He wasn't lying. She could see it in the grim set of his jaw. This wasn't a drama. This was an execution in progress, and she had just stepped onto the scaffold. She started. Panic finally beginning to claw at her throat. He saw the hesitation. He knew he was about to pass out. The edges of his vision were already black. He needed to make sure she understood the stakes before he went under. He needed to make sure she didn't run to the police, because the police were likely on the payroll of the men hunting him. He pulled her down until their foreheads almost touched. The intimacy was terrifying, forced by blood and circumstance. "Look at me," he commanded. She looked. She couldn't look away. "Now you can't leave," he whispered, the words sounding like a sentence. "They saw your face." Lauren stared at him, the air leaving her lungs. "What?" "They saw you," he lied. Or maybe he believed it. Or maybe he just needed to terrify her enough to keep her close. "You're in this now." His hand finally lost its strength. It slid from her wrist, leaving a smear of blood on her skin like a brand. His eyes rolled back, the lids fluttering shut as his body gave up the fight against the trauma. "Wait!" Lauren cried, tapping his cheek. "Don't pass out. Wake up." Silvio Ricchetti didn't answer. He lay motionless on her kitchen floor, the blood continuing to seep around her fingers. Lauren sat back on her heels, trembling. The fire in the living room crackled louder, consuming the sofa. Outside, the sound of the approaching engine grew distinct. A heavy vehicle, crunching over the gravel of her driveway, slowing down as it spotted the wreckage. She was alone. Her house was burning. A dying man was on her floor, and killers were in her driveway. "They saw your face," the words echoed in her mind. She looked down at the man. He was her only link to understanding what was happening. And he was unconscious. She looked at the back door. She could run. She could run into the cornfields and hide. But if she ran, he would die. And if they really had seen her, they would hunt her down eventually. Lauren Cole swallowed the scream building in her throat. She looked at her medical bag, then at the man's prone form. She grabbed the handle of the bag. "Damn it," she whispered. She grabbed his ankles again. She didn't check the driveway. She didn't check the fire. She just pulled. She pulled him deeper into the house, toward the pantry, toward the shadows, as the headlights of the second car swept across the kitchen window, illuminating the blood she had left behind. She wasn't a veterinarian anymore. She was an accomplice, and the night had only just begun. The pantry was a claustrophobic box of shadows, smelling of dried herbs, flour, and the overwhelming metallic stench of fresh blood. Lauren had managed to drag the heavy man behind a stack of shelving units, just seconds before the headlights of the second vehicle swept across the kitchen windows, painting the walls in brief, blinding strokes of white light. The heavy rumble of the engine outside idled, a mechanical growl that vibrated through the floorboards, distinct from the crackling fire consuming the living room. Lauren was crouched on the linoleum, her hands slick with red. Her heart was beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a sensation she usually associated with trapped animals, not herself. Beside her, Silvio Ricchetti shifted. The movement was small, a mere tensing of muscle, but in the tight space it felt seismic. He was awake again. The momentary lapse in consciousness had passed, replaced by a cold, terrifying lucidity that cut through his pain like a scalpel. He didn't groan. He didn't ask where he was. His dark brown eyes, now adjusted to the gloom, locked onto her face with an intensity that made the air feel thin. "How many?" he rasped. The sound was wet, broken, but the authority in it was intact. Lauren swallowed, her throat dry. "One car. Maybe a truck. I saw the lights." "They'll circle first," Silvio said. He tried to adjust his position, pressing a hand against the makeshift packing Lauren had shoved into his abdominal wound. His knuckles turned white. "They check the perimeter. Then they breach. We have 3 minutes, maybe 4. We need to stay quiet," Lauren whispered, her instinct to hide overriding everything else. If we stay here, we burn." Silvio cut her off. He reached out, his grip finding her forearm again. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was an anchor. "Look at the smoke, Dottoressa. They aren't coming in to check pulses. They're coming to scrub the site." Lauren looked toward the kitchen doorway. The orange glow from the living room was brighter now, the crackling sound louder. Smoke was beginning to curl along the ceiling, a gray snake seeking an exit. He was right. The crash hadn't just damaged the house. It had started a bonfire, and the men outside would likely help it along to destroy the evidence. "My truck is out back," Lauren said, her mind finally engaging with the tactical reality. "It's old, but it runs. If we can get to the service road behind the barn—" "Go," Silvio commanded. He tried to push himself up, using the shelves for leverage. His face went ashen, sweat beading on his forehead, but he forced his body to obey. "Get the truck. Bring it to the back door." Lauren nodded, preparing to move. But then she froze. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. "The barn," she breathed. Silvio looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "What?" The barn is right next to the house, Lauren said, her voice rising in panic. If the house goes up, the wind will carry the sparks. The roof is old wood. It'll catch in minutes. So let it catch, Silvio snapped, his patience fraying under the agony of his wound. We are leaving. My patients are in there, Lauren hissed, turning back to him, her fear momentarily replaced by a fierce professional protectiveness. I have 3 horses in the stalls. One is sedated. Duchess can't walk out on her own if the smoke gets thick. I have to open the gates. Silvio stared at her as if she were speaking a dead language. He was a man who traded in lives like currency, who understood sacrifice as a necessary component of business. You want to go out there, in the open, with killers in the driveway, to save livestock? They aren't livestock to me, she said, her voice hard. They're my responsibility. I won't leave them to burn alive. You die, they die anyway, he countered, his voice a low growl. You step out that door, you're a target. Then I'll be quick. Lauren didn't wait for his permission. She wasn't one of his soldiers. She scrambled up, keeping low, and moved toward the back door of the kitchen. Wait! Silvio's voice was a strained bark, but she was already moving. She slipped out into the storm. The cold rain was a shock to her system, washing away the warmth of the house instantly. The wind was ferocious, whipping her hair across her face, blinding her. She stayed close to the siding of the house, moving in the shadows, her eyes darting toward the front of the property. She could see the silhouette of the second vehicle, a large SUV, idling near the wreckage of Silvio's car. 2 men were out, flashlights cutting through the rain, examining the crushed sedan. They were distracted, shouting to each other over the wind. Lauren sprinted. She crossed the muddy gap between the house and the barn, her boots slipping on the wet earth. She reached the heavy sliding door of the barn and heaved it open just enough to squeeze through. Inside, the smell of hay and warm animal bodies was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The horses were already panicking. They could smell the smoke. Hooves kicked against wooden stalls, a rhythmic, terrified drumming. I know, Lauren whispered, rushing to the first stall. She didn't waste time with halters. She threw the bolt and swung the door wide. Go, get out. She slapped the flank of the gelding, a big roan, and he bolted into the center aisle. She moved to the next. Duchess, the mare she had stitched up earlier. She was groggy, stumbling as the noise frightened her. Lauren grabbed her mane, pulling her forward, guiding her out of the stall. Come on, Mama, she urged. Move. She got Duchess into the aisle and ran to the back of the barn, throwing open the large rear doors that led to the open pasture. The wind howled in, but it was the path to safety. She shooed the horses out, watching them gallop into the darkness, away from the fire, away from the men. Safe. She turned to leave, but a beam of light cut through the cracks in the barn wall. The men were moving. They were coming toward the house. Lauren dropped to a crouch. She had to get back to Silvio. She had to get the truck. But the path back to the house was now exposed. Back in the kitchen, Silvio Ricchetti had managed to drag himself into a sitting position against the cabinets. The pain was a living thing, tearing at his side with every breath, but he pushed it down into a dark corner of his mind. He checked his jacket. His primary weapon was gone, lost in the crash. He reached down to his ankle holster. Empty. He cursed silently in Italian. The impact must have torn it loose. He looked around the kitchen. Knives. He could use a knife. It was sloppy, close-range work, and in his condition, he'd lose a wrestling match, but he could maybe take one with him. Then he saw it. Under the debris of the table, half hidden by a fallen chair, was the glint of black metal. His spare piece. A compact 9mm he kept in the glove box. It must have been thrown clear when the dashboard shattered. He crawled toward it. The movement cost him dearly. Black spots danced in his vision, and he felt the warm gush of fresh blood soaking the bandage Lauren had applied. He gritted his teeth, sweat stinging his eyes, and reached out. His fingers closed around the cold, textured grip of the gun. It felt like shaking hands with an old friend. He checked the magazine. Full. Chambered. He heard the back door open. He raised the weapon instantly, leveling it at the shadow entering the room. It's me, Lauren gasped, throwing her hands up as she slid inside, dripping wet and shivering. Silvio didn't lower the gun immediately. He tracked her movement, ensuring no one was behind her. When the door clicked shut, he let the barrel drop. "The horses?" he asked. There was no mockery in his voice now. He had watched her run through the rain from the window. He had seen the risk she took. It was stupid, reckless, and undeniably brave. It told him everything he needed to know about her. She didn't panic, she acted. And she protected what was hers. "Out," she panted, wiping rain from her eyes. "They're safe." "Good," he said, "because we're out of time." A heavy thud echoed from the front of the house, the sound of a boot kicking in the front door. "Check the rooms," a deep voice shouted from the living room. "If he's not in the car, he crawled somewhere to die." Lauren's eyes went wide. She looked at Silvio. He beckoned her closer. "Come here." She moved to him, crouching beside him. The fire in the living room was roaring now, the heat seeping into the kitchen. The smoke was getting thicker, creating a haze that stung the lungs. Silvio took her hand, the one that wasn't holding the gun, and pressed something cold and heavy into it. "I need you to listen to me very carefully," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the fire and the storm. "I can't walk to the truck. Not fast enough." "I'll help you," she said. "No," he said. "You're going to have to cover me." He pressed the gun into her palm. Lauren stared at it. It was heavy, terrifyingly real. She had treated gunshot wounds. She had dug bullets out of hunting dogs, but she had never held a weapon designed to kill people. I can't," she stammered. "I don't know how." "It's a machine," Silvio said, his eyes locking onto hers, forcing her to focus. "Just like your tools. Point, squeeze. It's not magic. I can't kill anyone," she whispered. "You might not have a choice," he said grimly. "If they come through that door, they will put a bullet in your head, and then they will burn this house down with your body inside. That is the reality. Do you understand?" Lauren looked at the gun, then at the door leading to the hallway. She could hear heavy footsteps crunching on the broken glass. They were getting closer. "Show me," she said. Her voice trembled, but she tightened her grip on the handle. Silvio guided her hands. He ignored the pain in his gut, focusing entirely on her. His large, rough hands covered hers, adjusting her grip. "Thumbs forward," he instructed, his voice low and steady in her ear. "Don't cross them behind the slide or it'll take your skin off. Finger off the trigger until you are ready to destroy what is in front of you." He moved her finger to the frame of the gun. "There is no safety on this model," he said. "The safety is your brain. Do not point it at anything you want to keep breathing." The footsteps stopped just outside the kitchen. A shadow fell across the slice of light on the floor. "Marco?" A voice called out. "Kitchen is clear? Checking it now." Another voice replied. Closer. Silvio looked at Lauren. He saw the terror in her blue eyes, but he also saw the steel spine that had made her run into a storm to save a horse. "We go out the back," he whispered. "I'll take the lead. If I fall, you don't stop. You get to the truck, you drive, and you don't look back." "I'm not leaving you," she said. It wasn't a romantic declaration. It was a statement of fact. She hadn't saved him from the crash just to let him die on her kitchen floor. Silvio felt a strange sensation in his chest that had nothing to do with the bullet wound. He nodded once. "Help me up." Lauren hooked her arm under his uninjured side. She gritted her teeth and heaved. Silvio groaned, a sound torn from the depths of his agony, as he forced his legs to take his weight. He leaned heavily on her, his breathing jagged. They stood there for a second, swaying in the smoky darkness. A man and a woman, covered in blood and rain, holding on to each other because there was nothing else left. "Ready?" he asked. Lauren gripped the gun in her right hand, her left arm supporting the weight of a MAFIA don. She looked at the back door. "Ready," she lied. Silvio kicked the back door open. The wind grabbed it, slamming it against the siding. The noise alerted the men inside. "Kitchen! They're in the kitchen! Go!" Silvio roared, pushing himself off her to stumble into the rain. Lauren followed, turning back for just a split second. She saw a figure burst through the smoke into the kitchen, a a silhouette raising a rifle. She didn't think. She didn't weigh the moral implications. She raised the gun the way Silvio had shown her, both hands shaking, and pulled the trigger. The recoil shocked her, traveling up her arms like an electric jolt. The gun barked, a flash of fire in the dark. The shot went wide, shattering a cabinet, but it forced the gunman to duck for cover. "Don't stop!" Silvio yelled from the yard. Lauren turned and ran. She caught up to him near the edge of the driveway where her old rusted pickup truck was parked. Silvio was leaning against the passenger door, his face white as a sheet, clutching his side where fresh blood was soaking through his suit. "Keys," he demanded. She fumbled in her pocket, pulling out the ring. She unlocked the door, shoving him inside. He fell into the seat more than he sat. Lauren ran to the driver's side. She jumped in, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine turned over with a reluctant whine, sputtering before roaring to life. A bullet shattered the rear window, spraying them with safety glass. Lauren screamed, ducking her head. "Drive!" Silvio shouted, slumping low in the seat. She slammed her foot on the gas. The truck spun its tires in the mud, fishtailing wildly before finding traction. They shot forward, not toward the road where the enemy SUV was blocking the exit, but toward the fields. She smashed through the wooden fence she had built herself last summer. The truck bounced violently over the uneven ground of the pasture. Lauren fought the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Behind them, the house was fully engulfed now. Flames licked up the sides of the second story, turning her home into a pyre against the black sky. She saw the headlights of the SUV turning, trying to follow. But the heavy armored vehicle bogged down in the deep mud of the yard. They kept driving. Through the tall grass, through the storm, into the dark embrace of the woods that bordered her land. Lauren didn't look at Silvio. She kept her eyes on the tree line, tears finally mixing with the rain on her face. She drove until the glow of the fire was just a faint orange smudge in the rearview mirror. Only then did she glance at the passenger seat. Silvio was watching her. He was barely conscious, his head resting against the cool glass of the window, the gun resting loosely in his lap. He looked at her profile. The sharp nose, the determined jaw, the blood spattered on her cheek. "You missed," he murmured, his voice faint. "I hit the cabinet," she said, her voice shaking. "You didn't freeze," he said. It sounded like a benediction. He closed his eyes, his breathing shallow. Lauren reached over, her hand trembling, and rested it on his neck. His pulse was there. Fast, weak, but there. "Where are we going?" she asked, the reality of her situation finally crashing down on her. She was homeless. She was hunted. She had just shot at a man. Silvio opened his eyes one last time, fighting the darkness. "Chicago," he whispered. "We go to the city. We disappear." Lauren looked ahead at the dark, winding trail that led away from everything she had ever known. She tightened her grip on the wheel. "Okay," she said softly. "Chicago." She drove on into the night, the storm swallowing them whole, leaving nothing behind but footprints in the mud and a burning house to mark where Lauren Cole's life had ended, and where something else entirely had begun. The old suspension of the rusted pickup truck groaned in protest as Lauren Cole slammed it over a submerged root, the vehicle shuddering violently before finding traction in the deep, churning mud. The headlights cut frantic, bouncing arcs through the deluge, illuminating a world that had narrowed down to wet tree trunks and the sleek black ribbon of a flooding dirt path. Inside the cab, the air was a suffocating mix of stale tobacco smoke from years past, wet dog, and the sharp copper tang of fresh blood that seemed to coat the back of Lauren's throat. She didn't look in the rearview mirror. She couldn't. If she looked, she knew she would see the orange glow that had already stained the low-hanging clouds behind them. She would see the pyre of everything she had built, the Victorian farmhouse she had sanded by hand, the clinic where she had saved countless animals, the photos of her parents on the mantel. It was all being consumed, fed by the gasoline of a hit squad and the uncaring fury of the storm. "Keep your eyes forward." Silvio Ricchetti's voice was a rough scrape against the silence, barely audible over the roaring engine and the rain hammering the metal roof. "I know where I'm going," Lauren snapped, her voice tight and trembling with a rage she hadn't known she possessed. She wrestled the steering wheel as the truck hydroplaned slightly on a patch of slick clay. She corrected the skid with a muscle memory born of a lifetime on these back roads. This trail cuts through the state forest. It dumps out onto the old highway near the quarry. They won't follow us here. Their heavy SUVs will bottom out within a mile. Silvio didn't answer immediately. He was slumped against the passenger door, his left hand pressing a wad of napkins. Grabbed from the glove box in a moment of desperation, against his side. The blood was soaking through them, dark and heavy. His face was a mask of concentration, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered beneath his ear. He wasn't looking at the road. He was looking at her. He watched the way her hands, white-knuckled and stained with his blood, gripped the wheel. He saw the tears she refused to shed, tracking through the soot on her cheek. Most civilians would be screaming by now. They would be hysterical, freezing up, or begging for an explanation. Lauren Cole was doing none of those things. She was driving like a getaway pilot, calculating angles and traction, her mind evidently compartmentalizing the trauma in real time. "You're bleeding through," she said, glancing at him for a fraction of a second before returning her gaze to the treacherous path. "We need to stop and repack that wound." "No stopping." Silvio gritted out, closing his eyes as the truck hit another pothole that sent a jolt of agony up his spine. "Distance is the only medicine right now." "How far to the highway?" 10 miles of this, then pavement," she replied. "But we can't just drive this truck into the city. It's registered to me. If they know who I am." "They know," Silvio confirmed, the coldness of his tone chilling her more than the draft coming through the window seals. "They ran the plates on your car before they even breached the house. They know your name, your social security number, where you went to veterinary school. By morning, your bank accounts will be flagged." Lauren felt a hollow pit open in her stomach. "So I'm just gone? Erased? You're alive," Silvio said. "That's the only metric that matters tonight." He shifted, reaching into the inside pocket of his ruined suit jacket. His movements were slow, labored, like moving through water. He produced a small, nondescript black phone. It wasn't the smartphone she had seen him smash earlier. This was a burner, old school, plastic, and cheap. He flipped it open, the small blue screen illuminating his harsh features. He dialed a number from memory, his thumb leaving a bloody print on the keypad. He held it to his ear, waiting. Lauren slowed the truck slightly as they approached a sharp bend where the creek had overflowed. She navigated the water carefully, the engine whining as the exhaust pipe dipped perilously close to the surface. "It's me," Silvio said into the phone. He spoke English, but the cadence was clipped, coded. The shipment was compromised. Total loss. A pause. Lauren strained to hear the voice on the other end, but it was just a tinny murmur. "No," Silvio continued, his eyes opening to stare at the rain-streaked windshield. "I'm initiating the ghost protocol. Do not send a retrieval team to the primary site. It's burned. The asset is compromised." He looked at Lauren when he said asset. She tightened her grip on the wheel. "I need a clean extraction," he said. "Drop Point Bravo. The old motel off Route 41. Leave the keys in the exhaust pipe of the gray sedan. Make sure it's the sedan, Enzo." Nothing flashy. Another pause. Silvio listened, his expression darkening. "I don't care who is asking," he growled, a flash of the dangerous power returning to his voice despite his injury. "As far as the family is concerned, I died in that crash. Let Marco think he won. Let him get comfortable in my chair. I want total radio silence until I'm inside the city." He snapped the phone shut and dropped it into the cup holder. The silence that filled the cab afterwards was heavy with unspoken implications. "Ghost protocol?" Lauren asked, her voice flat. "If they think I'm dead, they stop hunting," Silvio explained, shifting his weight to alleviate the pressure on his abdomen. "They relax. They make mistakes. It buys us time." "Us," Lauren repeated. "You mean it buys you time? I'm just the collateral damage." Silvio turned his head, looking at her fully. The dashboard lights cast deep shadows across his face, emphasizing the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the intensity of his dark brown eyes. "You aren't collateral anymore, Dottoressa. You saved my life twice in 1 hour. That makes you an investment." "I'm a veterinarian," she corrected, swerving to avoid a fallen branch. "And I just lost everything because you couldn't keep your car on the road. I didn't crash because of bad driving," he murmured, his voice growing weaker as the adrenaline began to ebb, leaving only the shock. Brake lines were cut, bullet to the rear tire. It was precise. Lauren didn't respond. She was thinking about the horses. They were out in the pasture, scared and wet, but alive. Duchess would find the neighbor's barn. She was smart. The fire department would come eventually, but there would be nothing left to save of the house. She thought about her grandmother's quilt on the bed upstairs. Gone. Her diploma on the wall. Gone. She forced the thoughts away. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had a dying man in her passenger seat and a target on her back. "We're coming up on the highway," she announced. The trees were thinning out, replaced by the jagged silhouette of the old quarry fencing. "The motel is about 5 miles south." "Good," Silvio breathed. He was paler now, his skin taking on a waxy sheen. "Park around the back. Avoid the cameras in the lobby." "You need a hospital," Lauren said again, frustration bubbling up. "I can't stitch a gut wound with a first aid kit and a bottle of vodka." "You'll have better than that," Silvio muttered, his eyes fluttering shut. "Just get us to the car." The transition from the dirt path to the asphalt of the highway felt jarringly smooth. Lauren accelerated, the truck's engine roaring as she pushed it to its limit. The road was empty, a desolate stretch of wet blacktop under the storm. 10 minutes later, she spotted the flickering neon sign of the motel. It was a run-down place, the kind where people went when they didn't want to be found. "Vacancy," buzzed in a dying red light. Lauren killed the headlights before turning into the lot, coasting around the side of the building to the darker, unlit area near the dumpsters. She spotted it immediately. A nondescript gray sedan parked in the shadows, unassuming and common. She put the truck in park and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the rain drumming on the roof. "We're here," she said, turning to Silvio. He didn't move. "Silvio," she said, shaking his shoulder gently. He groaned, his eyes cracking open. He was fading fast. The blood loss was catching up to him. "Key," he mumbled. Exhaust. Lauren jumped out of the truck. The rain soaked her instantly, cold and biting. She ran to the sedan, crouching down behind it. Her fingers fumbled inside the cold metal of the tailpipe until she felt the hard edge of a key fob. She pulled it out, pressed the unlock button, and the lights of the sedan flashed once. She opened the rear door of the sedan first. On the seat, there was a duffel bag. She unzipped it quickly. Inside, she saw stacks of cash, passports, and a high-end medical trauma kit. He had prepared for this. She ran back to the truck and yanked the passenger door open. Silvio all but fell into her arms. He was heavy, dead weight against her, smelling of copper and expensive cologne and rain. "Come on," she grunted, wrapping her arm around his waist and hoisting him up. "Help me." He stumbled, his legs not working right, but he forced them to move. They shuffled across the wet pavement like participants in a grotesque three-legged race. Lauren bore the brunt of his weight, her boots slipping on the oil-slicked asphalt. She could feel the heat radiating off him, the fever of trauma setting in. "Almost there," she whispered, more to herself than him. They reached the sedan. She opened the passenger door and helped him lower himself into the seat. He let out a sharp hiss of breath as he settled, his hand immediately going back to the wound. "Medical bag," he gasped, pointing to the back seat. "I saw it," Lauren said. She slammed his door and ran around to the driver's side. The interior of the sedan smelled of nothing. It was sterile, new leather, and that generic new car scent. It felt alien compared to the earthy, lived-in smell of her truck. She started the car. The engine purred to life, silent and powerful. "My truck," Lauren said, looking at her faithful old vehicle abandoned next to a dumpster. "It's going to lead them right here." "Enzo will take care of it," Silvio murmured, his head leaning back against the headrest. He was fighting to stay awake, fighting to maintain command. He's watching. He'll torch it and move it before the sun comes up. Lauren looked at the dark windows of the motel, wondering where this Enzo was watching from. The paranoia that Silvio lived with was contagious. She felt exposed, naked. "Drive," Silvio ordered, his voice barely a whisper. "Chicago. The secure garage on Wacker." "Do you know it?" "I know it," Lauren said. She put the car in gear. As they pulled out of the lot, leaving her truck and her past behind in the rain, Lauren looked at Silvio. He was watching her again. That intense predator's gaze dimmed by pain, but not extinguished. "You're doing well," he said softly. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her hands gripping the leather steering wheel. "Good," Silvio replied. "Fear keeps you sharp. Comfort gets you killed." He reached into the duffel bag she had tossed onto the center console and pulled out a fresh compression bandage. With shaking hands, he tried to open the packaging. "Let me," Lauren said, reaching over without taking her eyes off the road completely. She ripped the package open with one hand and handed it to him. "You have good hands," he noted, pressing the pad to his side. "Steady. I'm used to patients who try to kick me," she said dryly. A ghost of a smile touched Silvio's lips. Not a nice smile, but a grim acknowledgement of her grit. "I'll try not to kick." "You wouldn't have the energy," she retorted. The banter was a shield, a way to keep the reality at bay. The reality that she was driving a mafia boss into the heart of a city he claimed to rule, while her life burned to ash in the rearview mirror. "Why me?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "Why did you crash at my house? Of all the miles of road." "Fate," Silvio muttered, his eyes closing again. "Or bad luck, depending on how this ends." "It ends with you paying me back for my house," Lauren said firmly. "If I live," Silvio whispered, his voice fading into the hum of the engine. "I'll give you the world, Lauren Cole. But first, you have to get me through the night." Lauren looked at him. He was out again. Unconscious or just conserving energy, she couldn't tell. She looked at the road ahead, the rain clearing slightly as they approached the highway lights. The city was aglow on the horizon, a sprawling beast of concrete and light. She was alone with him. There were no police coming, no fire trucks, no cavalry, just her, a stolen life, and the most dangerous man in Illinois bleeding out on her leather seats. Lauren Cole squared her shoulders. She drove. The veterinarian was gone. The survivor was behind the wheel. And she wasn't going to let him die. Not tonight. 3 weeks had passed since the night the sky had opened up and swallowed Lauren Cole's life whole. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of existing in a vacuum where time was measured not by the sun or the needs of her animals, but by the healing rate of a bullet wound and the encrypted hum of server fans. The safe house was a fortress of glass and steel, perched atop one of Chicago's nondescript residential towers on Wacker Drive. It was nothing like the farmhouse. There was no smell of damp earth, no creaking wood, no comforting warmth of a living thing breathing in the next room. This place smelled of ozone, filtered air, and the harsh antiseptic cleanser Lauren used to scrub the granite countertops. It was luxurious, certainly. The furniture was Italian leather. The appliances were top-of-the-line German engineering, and the view of the river was worth millions, but it felt less like a home and more like a high-end cage. Lauren stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city lights blurring through the evening fog. She held a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She wasn't drinking it. She was just holding it for the warmth against her palms. Her reflection in the glass looked different than the woman who had run out into a storm to save a horse. That woman had been frantic, reactive. This woman was still, watchful, wearing gray cashmere lounge pants and a fitted black tank top that Silvio had ordered for her, along with a wardrobe of essentials. She looked like a ghost haunting a skyscraper. "You're pacing again, even when you're standing still," a voice rumbled from the kitchen island behind her. Lauren turned slowly. Silvio Ricchetti was sitting on a bar stool, the glow of 3 different laptops illuminating his face in harsh blue light. He looked better. The waxen, deathly pallor of that first night was gone, replaced by a tired but healthy olive tone. He was shirtless, a testament to the heat he claimed the central air couldn't regulate, though Lauren suspected it was just easier to change his bandages without fabric in the way. The dressing on his left side was clean, a stark white square against his tan skin. The bruising that had covered his ribs like a map of violence had faded to a sickly yellow-green, almost gone. He was healing with a terrifying speed, his body knitting itself back together through sheer force of will. "I'm not pacing," Lauren said, walking over to the sink to dump her cold coffee. "I'm thinking." "Dangerous habit," Silvio murmured, his eyes not leaving the center screen where lines of code and bank transfers scrolled continuously. "Thinking leads to worrying. Worrying changes nothing." "Easy for you to say," Lauren countered, leaning her hip against the counter. "You have an empire to rebuild from the grave. I just have a burnt foundation and a fake name." Silvio stopped typing. His hands, large and scarred, hovered over the keyboard. He looked up at her, and the intensity in those dark brown eyes hadn't diminished in 3 weeks. If anything, it had distilled into something sharper. Living in close quarters with him was like living with a tiger that was temporarily confined to a small room. He was calm, but the potential for violence was always humming beneath the surface. "You have safety," he said, his voice low. "And you have me." "I have you," Lauren repeated, a dry laugh escaping her throat. "And you have a ghost network. We're a regular pair of phantoms." She walked around the island, her veterinarian instincts taking over as she approached him. "It's time to check the incision. Rotate." Silvio didn't argue. In the beginning, he had fought her on every medical intervention, hating the weakness, hating the dependency. Now, it was part of their routine. He swiveled the chair, lifting his left arm so she could access his side. Lauren peeled back the medical tape with practiced gentleness. The wound was closing beautifully. The angry red edges had settled into a pink scar line, jagged but sealed. There was no sign of infection. She pressed her fingers lightly around the area, checking for heat or swelling. "Pain?" she asked. "Manageable." He grunted. "Scale of 1 to 10, Silvio. Don't give me the tough guy act. I've treated stallions less stubborn than you." He smirked, a rare expression that softened the harsh planes of his face. 3, only when I twist. It's healing well," she pronounced, applying a fresh layer of antibiotic ointment before securing a lighter dressing. "Another week and we can take the stitches out. You'll have a scar, but you kept the kidney." "I have 2, he said dismissively. "I can spare 1. Lauren finished the dressing and washed her hands. She dried them on a towel, watching him return to his screens. He had been at it for 18 hours a day since the fever broke. He was hunting for the money trail, hunting for the leak, hunting for the person who had sold him out to the Albanians. "You're stuck," she observed. Silvio stiffened. He slammed the laptop lid down a fraction of an inch, a gesture of frustration he rarely allowed himself. "I am not stuck. I am thorough. You've been staring at the same shipping manifest for 4 hours, Lauren pointed out. "I've watched you scroll up and down the same column of numbers since dinner." He sighed, running a hand through his short black hair. "Something is wrong. The money was moved, but the books are balanced. It doesn't make sense. If they paid for the hit using family funds, there would be a deficit, a hole. But there is nothing. The accounts are perfect." "Maybe they didn't use family funds," Lauren suggested. "The Albanians don't work on credit, and they don't work cheap," Silvio growled. "The contract for a hit on a Don. That's 7 figures minimum, half up front. That kind of cash doesn't just appear out of thin air. It came from inside. It had to." He rubbed his eyes, the exhaustion finally showing. "I'm missing it. It's right in front of me, and I'm missing it." Lauren looked at the screen. It was a dense spreadsheet of imports, olive oil, textiles, marble, coming in from Italy and Greece. It was a language of commerce she didn't speak, but she understood systems. Biology was a system. A healthy body was a balanced ledger. Illness was a deficit or a chaotic surplus. "Move over," she said. Silvio looked at her, his eyebrow arching. "Excuse me?" "Move over," she repeated, nudging his shoulder. "Let me look. Lauren, this isn't a medical chart. These are laundering fronts for international shipping logistics. It's complicated. I decipher blood work panels for animals that can't tell me where it hurts," she said calmly. "And I ran a business for 5 years. Math is math, Silvio. Sometimes you need fresh eyes. You're looking for what you expect to see. I don't know enough to have expectations. He hesitated, then slowly slid the stool over, giving her space. It was a massive concession of territory. He was letting her into the inner sanctum of his operation. Lauren stood next to him, leaning over the keyboard. She could smell him. Soap, musk, and the faint medicinal scent of the ointment. She focused on the screen. "Okay," she said, squinting at the rows. "Explain the baseline." "What is normal? Column A is the declared value of the shipment," Silvio explained, pointing a long finger at the screen. "Column B is the insurance valuation. Column C is the actual tax paid upon entry." Lauren scanned the numbers. They matched. It was boringly perfect. "And these dates?" she asked, pointing to the timestamps. "Arrival dates at the port of Newark." Lauren scrolled down. Hundreds of entries. Thousands of tons of cargo. It was dizzying. But as she scrolled, her brain started to pick up a rhythm. It was like listening to a heartbeat. Lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. And then a skip. "Stop," she said. "What?" "Scroll back up. 2 months ago. The shipment of ceramic tiles." Silvio scrolled up. "What about it?" "Look at the weight," she said. "It's listed as 4,000 pounds. The tax is calculated for 4,000 pounds. But look at the fuel surcharge on the trucking invoice in column F." Silvio squinted. "It's standard." "No, it's not," Lauren corrected. "I have a truck. I haul trailers. I know fuel consumption. The surcharge here is for a load that weighs significantly less. If they were hauling 4,000 pounds of tile, the fuel cost would be 20% higher for that distance." Silvio went still. He leaned in closer, his shoulder brushing hers. "Are you saying the container was light?" "I'm saying the container was empty," Lauren said, "or filled with styrofoam. They declared the value, they paid the tax to make it look legitimate, but they didn't ship the product, which means they pocketed the overhead." Silvio finished, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The cost of the goods. If you don't buy the marble, but you bill the company for it, you keep the purchase price," Lauren said. "How much is a container of marble?" $50,000, Silvio said. He began typing furiously now, his fingers flying across the keys. "If they did this once a week for a year..." "Ghost shipments," Lauren murmured. "It looks like business as usual on the tax forms, but the money for the product goes into a black hole." Silvio pulled up a new window, cross-referencing the shipping manifests with the trucking logs. He filtered by the specific fuel discrepancy Lauren had noticed. The screen filled with red highlights. "God," Silvio breathed. "It's everywhere. Small amounts. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. Siphoned off over 3 years. It's millions. They've been bleeding me dry for 3 years. Who signs off on the trucking invoices?" Lauren asked. "That's the choke point. Someone has to approve the lower fuel bill while the main ledger shows the full weight." Silvio didn't answer immediately. He stared at the screen, his face hardening into a mask of stone. He clicked on the digital signature at the bottom of the invoice. A name appeared. G. Moretti. "Who is G. Moretti?" Lauren asked. "Nobody," Silvio said. "A low-level dock foreman. He doesn't have the brains to set up a shell corporation for the kickbacks." "Then look at who pays G. Moretti," Lauren suggested. Silvio traced the payroll ID. It routed through a subsidiary company called Janus Holdings. He hacked into the corporate registry for Janus Holdings. It was a dummy corporation, registered in the Caymans. But the recovery email for the admin account... Silvio stopped breathing. Lauren looked at the screen. The recovery email was an old, personal address. mk1985protonmail.com. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating. Lauren saw Silvio's hand tremble once, then clench into a fist so tight his knuckles cracked. "Marco," he whispered. The name sounded like a curse. "Your consigliere," Lauren said softly. She remembered the name from his stories during their late-night dinners. The man he called brother. The man who had stood beside him at his father's funeral. Silvio stood up abruptly. The chair skidded back across the hardwood floor with a harsh screech. He walked to the window, placing his hands against the glass, leaning his forehead against the cool surface. He sat at my table, Silvio said, his voice hollow. He poured wine for my mother. He carried my sister's casket. Lauren didn't move. She knew better than to offer platitudes. This wasn't a boo-boo she could kiss better. This was a knife in the back, twisted by the one person supposed to guard it. He's stealing from the family to pay for the bullets to kill me, Silvio said, turning around. His eyes were dry, but they were burning with a cold, terrifying fire. He didn't just want me dead, Lauren. He wanted the throne. He's been building a war chest for years. He thinks you're dead, Lauren reminded him. He thinks he's won. He has, Silvio said. He's dissolving the loyalist factions right now. I saw the memos. He's restructuring. He's clearing house. He looked at Lauren. I have to kill him. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a debate. It was a statement of physics. Gravity makes things fall. Betrayal makes men die. I know, Lauren said. She didn't flinch. 3 weeks ago, the thought of murder would have sickened her. Now, after living in the shadow of this man, after seeing the scars on his body and the burden he carried, she understood the brutal logic of his world. If Marco lived, Silvio died. And if Silvio died, she was dead too. Silvio looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the acceptance in her eyes. She wasn't judging him. She wasn't terrified of the monster he was about to become. She had helped him find the monster. He walked back to the island, closing the distance between them. He stopped inches from her. The heat of his body was palpable. You found what I couldn't, he said softly. You saw the pattern. I look for the things that don't fit, she said. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, rough skin against soft. It was the most intimate contact they had shared since the crash, charged with electricity. I told you to leave, he whispered. That night at the motel, I told you to run. I don't run, Lauren said, leaning slightly into his touch, her heart hammering against her ribs. No, Silvio murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. You don't. You stay. You fight. He dropped his hand, stepping back as if the contact burned him. He couldn't afford to be soft now. He needed to be sharp. He needed to be the weapon she had saved. Marco is hosting the Unity Gala on Saturday, Silvio said, his voice shifting back to business, though his eyes lingered on her lips for a fraction of a second too long. It's a charity ball. All the families will be there. The Russians, the Irish, the cartel representatives. He's going to use it to announce his succession. He's going to announce he's the new Dawn, Lauren clarified. Yes, in front of everyone. It's the perfect stage. Silvio walked back to the laptops. He began typing again, but the rhythm was different now. It was faster, aggressive. He wasn't searching anymore. He was executing. If he wants a stage, Silvio said, a dark, predatory smile curving his lips, we will give him a show. He looked up at Lauren. Can you wear a wire? Lauren straightened her spine. The vet in her was gone. The Vic straightened her spine. The vet in her was gone. The victim was gone. I can do better than that, she said. I can get close to him. He doesn't know my face. You said it yourself, I'm a ghost. It's dangerous, Silvio warned. If he suspects, he won't, Lauren said. Because he's looking for a MAFIA soldier. He's not looking for a woman in a ball gown. Silvio stared at her for a long moment. He saw the steel in her. He realized then that he hadn't just saved her from the fire. She was the fire. Saturday, Silvio said. We take it all back. Saturday, Lauren agreed. She reached for his empty coffee mug. I'll make a fresh pot. It's going to be a long night. As she walked to the espresso machine, Silvio watched her. He had lost a brother today. But as he watched Lauren move through his kitchen with the confidence of a queen in exile, he knew he had gained something far more dangerous. He turned back to the screen, the reflection of the city lights dancing in his eyes, and began to write the script for his resurrection. Saturday morning in the penthouse on Wacker Drive did not bring sunlight or relaxation. It brought the heavy, suffocating tension of a battlefield in the moments before the first cannon fire. The floor-to-ceiling windows were obscured by heavy blackout curtains, turning the sprawling living space into a dimly lit command center. Maps of the Drake Hotel, blueprints of the ballroom, and lists of security rotations plastered the glass walls of Silvio's office, taped up with reckless precision. Silvio stood before the display, a stark contrast to the wounded man Lauren had dragged from the wreck 3 weeks ago. He was dressed in dark trousers and a fitted charcoal sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He moved with a predator's grace, the stiffness in his left side barely noticeable now, betrayed only by the way he occasionally shifted his weight to his right leg when standing still for too long. Lauren watched him from the doorway. She held a tablet in her hand, reviewing the guest list for the Unity Gala for the 100th time. "Marco has doubled the security at the service entrances," Silvio said, his voice rough with lack of sleep. He traced a line on the blueprint with a marker. "He's expecting a hit squad. He's expecting me to send a team of shooters through the kitchen or the loading dock. He's pulled men from the perimeter to fortify the back of the house, which leaves the front door exposed," Lauren noted, stepping into the room. "The front door is a choke point," Silvio countered without turning. "Metal detectors, facial recognition, and a phalanx of his personal guard. You can't walk a gun through the front door." "We aren't walking guns in," Lauren reminded him. "We're walking us in. The weapons are already inside, thanks to Enzo." Silvio finally turned to look at her. His expression was grim. "The plan has too many variables, Lauren. Enzo planted the pieces in the ventilation ducts 2 days ago, yes. But retrieving them requires time we might not have, and it requires you to be on the floor. We've been over this," she said, her voice steady. "I'm the only one who can do it." "I have men," Silvio growled, stepping closer, the air between them charged with the familiar friction of their arguments. "I have loyalists who would die to take this shot." "Marco knows you're loyalists," Lauren argued, not backing down. "He knows their faces. He knows their wives' names. He knows how they walk. If any of them step foot in that ballroom, they'll be marked before they reach the bar. But me? Who am I, Silvio? To Marco, I don't exist. I'm a variable he hasn't accounted for." Silvio stopped inches from her. He looked down, his dark brown eyes searching her face for any sign of hesitation. He found none. The veterinarian from the countryside had been forged into something harder in the crucible of this penthouse. She stood with her chin raised, her blue eyes clear and defiant. "You are not a soldier," he said softly, the words sounding more like a plea than an accusation. "If things go wrong, if the shooting starts before we are ready, you don't have the training to clear the room. Then don't let things go wrong," she challenged. "You're the strategist. I'm just the distraction." Silvio clenched his jaw, the muscles feathering. He hated this. He hated that she was right. Strategically, she was the perfect asset. Invisible, unsuspected, intelligent. Emotionally, the idea of placing her within arm's reach of Marco, the man who had killed his brother in spirit and tried to kill him in flesh, made his blood run cold. But they were out of options. The gala was tonight. If they missed this window, Marco would solidify his power, and Silvio would be hunted until his luck ran out. "Fine," he breathed, the word heavy with resignation. "But you follow my lead. If I say we leave, we leave. If I tell you to drop to the floor, you drop. You do not hesitate. You do not try to be a hero." "I'm not trying to be a hero," Lauren said quietly. "I'm trying to get my life back." The doorbell rang, a soft, melodic chime that seemed out of place in the war room. "That will be the team," Silvio said, checking his watch. "I had Enzo send a styling crew. If we are walking through the front door, we need to look like we own the building." Lauren felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. "A styling crew? For a tactical insertion?" "Camouflage, Lauren," Silvio corrected. "In the jungle, you wear green. In high society, you wear silk and diamonds. If you look like a threat, they stop you. If you look like a trophy, they open the door for you." The team consisted of 3 people who bustled in with rolling racks of garment bags, cases of makeup, and an air of professional detachment that suggested they were used to clients who required discretion. They didn't ask why the windows were blacked out or why there were blueprints on the walls. They simply set up shop in the master bedroom, turning it into a chaotic salon. Silvio retreated to the guest room to prepare, leaving Lauren to the mercy of the stylist. Mr. Ricchetti gave us specific instructions. The lead stylist, a severe woman with silver hair named Elena, said as she unzipped a garment bag. Elegant, commanding, but distracting. He wants eyes on you, not on him. I get it, Lauren muttered, sitting in the chair as another assistant began prepping her hair. I'm the shiny object. You are the armor, Elena corrected gently. She spun the rack around. He rejected the pastels. He said you aren't a debutante. He rejected the black. He said you aren't mourning anyone yet. She pulled a dress from the center of the rack. The fabric caught the light, shimmering with a depth that was mesmerizing. He chose this one. It was a deep, rich burgundy. Not bright red, not purple, but the color of expensive wine or oxygenated blood. It was made of heavy silk satin that looked like liquid. Lauren stood up and touched the fabric. It was cool and smooth. It's intense. It's power, Elena said. Try it on. The transformation took 2 hours. Lauren watched in the mirror as the country vet disappeared. Her sun-bleached hair was smoothed into glossy Hollywood waves that cascaded over one shoulder. Her makeup was applied with architectural precision, contouring that sharpened her cheekbones, a smoky eye that made the blue of her irises pop with startling intensity, and a lip color that matched the deep wine of the dress. But it was the dress itself that changed her. When she stepped into it, the silk molded to her body like a second skin. It had a high neck in the front, deceptively modest. But when she turned, the back plunged dangerously low, exposing her spine down to the curve of her waist. It was elegant, fatal, and undeniably bold. It didn't ask for attention. It demanded it. Lauren looked at herself in the full-length mirror. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. This woman looked capable of murder. This woman looked like she belonged at the right hand of a devil. Perfect. Elena whispered, stepping back. Wait here. I'll tell him you're ready. The stylist packed up with efficient speed and left the apartment, leaving a lingering scent of hairspray and expensive powder. The silence returned, but it felt different now. It was the silence of a held breath. Lauren walked out of the bedroom and into the expansive living area. The lights had been dimmed for the evening. Silvio was waiting for her by the window, his back to her. He was wearing a tuxedo. It was cut to perfection, accommodating the holster he undoubtedly wore beneath the jacket. He looked broad, imposing, and devastatingly handsome, in the way a thunderstorm is beautiful, dark, powerful, and dangerous to be near. Silvio, she said softly. He turned. For a moment he didn't breathe. He didn't speak. He just looked at her. His gaze traveled from the hem of the burgundy gown, up the fluid line of her body, lingering on the exposed skin of her arms, and finally resting on her face. It wasn't just desire in his eyes, though there was plenty of that, a raw, burning hunger that made Lauren's knees weak. It was reverence. It was the look of a man seeing a weapon he hadn't realized was loaded. He walked toward her, his movements slow, deliberate. He stopped a foot away, afraid to touch her, afraid to break the image. I thought I knew what you looked like, he murmured, his voice husky. I was wrong. Is it too much? Lauren asked, feeling suddenly exposed despite the high neckline. The color is a warning, Silvio said. It tells them exactly what you are. And what am I? Dangerous, he whispered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a long velvet box. He didn't hand it to her. He opened it. Inside lay a necklace that made the breath catch in her throat. It was a string of rubies, dark and pigeon blood red, set in heavy platinum with diamonds scattered like stars between them. This belonged to my mother, Silvio said, his voice dropping an octave. She wore it only when my father had to meet with the 5 families. It was her way of showing them that the Ricchettis did not bow. Silvio, I can't, Lauren started, terrified by the weight of the history in his hands. This is priceless. It is protection. He interrupted gently. In our world, jewelry is a language. If you walk in there wearing this, the old guard will know. They will know you are under my direct protection. It tells them that to touch you is to declare war on me. He stepped behind her. Lauren lifted her hair, exposing the vulnerable nape of her neck. She felt the cold metal of the necklace settle against her skin, heavy and substantial. Then she felt his warm, rough fingers fumbling slightly with the clasp. His breath ghosted against her bare shoulder, sending a shiver racing down her spine. "There," he whispered, his hands lingering on her shoulders for a moment before dropping. Lauren turned to face him again. The rubies burned against her skin, matching the dress perfectly. "Do I look like a Richetti?" she asked, a challenge in her voice to mask her fear. Silvio looked at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. He reached out, taking her hand and raising it to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, not a gentlemanly peck, but a pressing, possessive kiss that lasted too long. "You look like a queen," he said against her skin. "And tonight, we take back the kingdom." He released her hand and stepped back, the mask of the dawn sliding back into place. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by icy resolve. "The car is waiting downstairs," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "Enzo is driving. We have earpieces in the car. Once we cross the threshold of the hotel, we are live. Remember the signal. If I touch my tie, you separate and head for the ladies' room near the service corridor. That's where the ventilation access is." "I remember," Lauren said. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Let's go." They walked to the private elevator in silence. The doors slid open, revealing the mirrored interior. As they descended, Lauren watched their reflection. The man in the tuxedo and the woman in the burgundy silk. They looked like the perfect couple. They looked like royalty. But as the numbers on the display ticked down, 30, 29, 28, Lauren knew the truth. They were two people walking into a lion's den with nothing but a plan and a prayer. "Silvio," she said, breaking the silence as they reached the lobby level. "Yes? If this goes wrong," she said, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "If we don't walk out, we walk out." He cut her off, turning to face her as the elevator slowed. He grabbed her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. The intensity of his gaze burned through her. "We walk out, Lauren, because I am not letting you die in a dress like that. You are going to live to take it off." The elevator chimed. The doors opened. The lobby was empty except for the concierge, who looked up and froze, visibly stunned by the couple emerging from the shadows. Silvio offered her his arm. "Ready?" Lauren took it. She felt the hard muscle beneath the expensive wool of his jacket. She felt the gun pressing against his side. She felt the rubies heavy on her throat. "Ready," she lied. They stepped out into the cool night air where the black limousine waited. The city of Chicago sprawled out before them, a grid of lights and shadows. Somewhere in that grid, Marco was raising a glass, thinking he had won. He was wrong. Silvio held the door for her, and as Lauren slid into the darkness of the car, the silk of her burgundy dress rustling like whispered secrets, she left the last of her fear on the sidewalk. Tonight, she wasn't the victim. Tonight, she was the vengeance. The limousine glided to a halt in front of the Drake Hotel, the tires crunching softly against the pristine pavement of the drop-off zone. Outside the tinted windows, the world was a blur of frenetic energy. Flashbulbs erupted like miniature lightning storms, illuminating the red carpet where the elite of Chicago's underworld mingled with legitimate high society under the guise of the Unity Gala. It was a charity event on paper, raising money for inner-city hospitals, but in practice, it was a summit. A place where truces were measured in champagne flutes and betrayals were whispered behind manicured hands. Inside the car, the silence was absolute. Silvio Richetti sat in the shadows, his profile carved from granite, his dark brown eyes fixed on the entrance. He didn't look like a man who had spent the last 3 weeks bleeding out in a safe house. He looked immortal. The tuxedo fit him with military precision, the stark white of his shirt contrasting with the deep tan of his skin. He adjusted his cufflinks, heavy gold knots, and turned to Lauren. "Remember," he said, his voice low, vibrating through the small space between them. "Breathe. You are not Lauren Cole, the veterinarian. You are the woman who holds the leash of the most dangerous man in this city. Walk like it." Lauren nodded, her hands smoothing the silk of the burgundy dress over her thighs. The fabric felt cool to the touch. a liquid armor that she had donned to go to war. The ruby necklace at her throat felt heavy, a physical weight that reminded her of the stakes. "I'm ready," she lied, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Enzo is at the north exit," Silvio murmured, tapping the small earpiece hidden in his right ear. "The weapons are in the ventilation shaft of the third-floor linen closet. But we won't need them if you play your part. Marco is a narcissist. He will want to gloat before he takes the crown. We use that." The driver opened the door. The noise of the city rushed in. Shouts of photographers, the murmur of the crowd, the distant wail of a siren. Silvio stepped out first. He buttoned his jacket, scanned the perimeter with a single, sweeping glance, and then turned to offer his hand to her. Lauren took it. As she stepped out into the flashing lights, she felt the shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't just attention. It was shock. A ripple went through the crowd nearest to the curb. Whispers ignited like dry tinder. "Richetti. He's alive. It's him." They walked up the red carpet, not rushing. Silvio moved with a predatory grace that forced people to part before him. He didn't acknowledge the cameras. He didn't acknowledge the stunned gasps of the lower-level mobsters who had spent the last week jockeying for position in his absence. He kept his hand firmly on the small of Lauren's back, a gesture that was possessive, protective, and unmistakably claiming. When they reached the heavy gold doors of the Gold Coast room, the security detail, men hired by Marco, froze. They recognized Silvio. Their hands twitched toward their earpieces, panic widening their eyes. "Good evening," Silvio said. His voice was calm, pleasant even, but it carried the threat of a loaded gun. "I believe I'm expected." The lead guard swallowed hard, his face draining of color. He stepped aside without a word. They entered the ballroom. If the sidewalk had been chaotic, the ballroom was a masterpiece of orchestrated opulence. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the gilded ceiling, casting a warm, honeyed glow over hundreds of guests. A string quartet played something classical and soothing in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the hum of conversation. Then, Silvio stepped into the light. The reaction was instantaneous. It started near the doors and spread outward like a shockwave. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses were lowered. The music faltered as the cellist looked up and missed a beat. A silence descended on the room, thick and heavy, suffocating the laughter and the clinking of silverware. Silvio Richetti, the man whose obituary had been quietly drafted by half the people in this room, was walking across the marble floor. And on his arm was a vision in blood-red silk. Lauren felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. She felt the judgment, the curiosity, the jealousy. She kept her chin high, channeling every ounce of cold fury she had felt, watching her house burn. She focused on the rubies at her throat, imagining they were shielding her. "I am not a victim," she repeated to herself. "I am the storm. Keep walking," Silvio whispered, his lips barely moving. "Don't look at the floor. Look at them. Make them look away." They moved toward the center of the room. A waiter, trembling, offered a tray of champagne. Silvio took 2 flutes, handing one to Lauren. He took a sip, his eyes scanning the crowd, cataloging threats, reading loyalties. "There," he murmured. Lauren followed his gaze. At the far end of the room, on a raised dais where a podium stood waiting, was a group of men laughing. In the center of them was Marco. He looked triumphant. He was holding a scotch, gesturing expansively with a cigar in his other hand. He looked like a king holding court. He hadn't seen them yet. His back was turned, soaking in the adulation of the sycophants surrounding him. "He looks comfortable," Lauren noted, ice in her voice. "He thinks he's celebrating a coronation," Silvio said. "He's about to celebrate his funeral." A woman detached herself from a nearby group and intercepted them. She was older, draped in diamonds and wearing a severe navy gown. It was Mrs. Rossi, the wife of one of the 5 families' heads. She had eyes like a hawk and a smile that looked like it had been sharpened on a whetstone. "Silvio," she purred, though her eyes were wide with genuine shock. "We heard terrible rumors. An accident." "Rumors are often exaggerated, Elena," Silvio replied smoothly, leaning in to kiss her cheek. As you can see, the reports of my demise were premature. Mrs. Rossi turned her gaze to Lauren. It was a dissecting look, analyzing the dress, the jewelry, the posture. And who is this? I don't believe we've been introduced. This is Lauren, Silvio said, not offering a surname, not offering an explanation. She is with me. A lovely dress, Mrs. Rossi said, her tone dripping with passive aggression. Bold color. Usually we reserve red for looser occasions. Lauren smiled. It was the smile she used when a client tried to tell her how to do her job. It's burgundy, actually, the color of oxygenated blood. It seemed appropriate, given that everyone here seems to be out for it tonight. Silvio stiffened slightly beside her, suppressing a smirk. Mrs. Rossi blinked, taken aback by the sharp retort. She laughed, a brittle sound. Charming. Welcome back, Silvio. She retreated, and Silvio leaned closer to Lauren. Oxygenated blood? It shut her up, Lauren whispered. Focus, Silvio commanded softly. Marco is moving. On the dais, Marco had turned. He handed his glass to an aide and checked his watch. He was preparing to speak. He still hadn't seen Silvio, blocked by the crowd and the pillars. He stepped off the dais and headed toward the service corridor that led to the private prep rooms behind the stage. That's the signal, Silvio said. He adjusted his tie. A subtle movement, barely a brush of his fingers against the silk knot. Go. Lauren didn't hesitate. She didn't say goodbye. She simply turned and melted into the crowd, moving in the opposite direction of Silvio. Silvio stood alone in the center of the room. He let the crowd see him now. He let the whispers grow. He waited. Lauren navigated the sea of tuxedos and gowns. She moved with purpose, heading toward the ladies' room that was situated near the service entrance. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs. She reached the hallway, checking over her shoulder. The coast was clear. Instead of entering the restroom, she slipped past the door and into the narrow service corridor. It was cooler here, smelling of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. She pressed her back against the wall, listening. The earpiece in her ear crackled. I'm in position. Silvio's voice came through, clear and calm. He's in the green room, 2 guards outside. You need to get to the ventilation grate in the pantry next door. It shares a wall. I'm moving, Lauren whispered. She found the pantry door. It was unlocked. She slipped inside. It was a small room stacked with crates of wine and linens. High on the wall, near the ceiling, was the vent. Lauren hiked up her silk dress, not caring about the cost. She climbed onto a crate of Pinot Noir, balancing precariously in her heels. She pulled the small directional microphone Enzo had given her from her clutch purse. It looked like a compact mirror. She pressed it against the vent. Voices drifted through, muffled at first, then clearer as she adjusted the frequency. Nervous, Marco? You're sweating. A rough voice. Unknown. I'm not nervous. Marco's voice. Arrogant, impatient. I'm ready. Is the transfer complete? The Albanians want the second half, the rough voice said. They said the job was messy. The house burned, but they didn't find the body. Lauren's breath hitched. She pressed the device harder against the metal grate. The body is ash, Marco snapped. The car exploded. The house burned to the foundation. There's nothing left of Silvio Ricchetti but dental records, and I made sure those vanished from the dentist's office last week. He's dead. The transfer goes through as soon as I leave that stage. And the girl? The voice asked. The vet? Collateral, Marco dismissed. If she was in the house, she's dust. If she wasn't, she's a nobody. Who cares? She's a loose end that tied itself. Now hand me the speech. It's time to accept the burden of leadership. Lauren's hand shook. She had it. The confession. The confirmation of the hit. The dismissal of her life as dust. Did you get it? She whispered into her comms. Crystal clear, Silvio's voice replied. It was the voice of the Reaper. Get out of there, Lauren. Go back to the floor. Stay near the exit. I'm coming out, she said. She jumped down from the crate, smoothing her dress. She slipped out of the pantry and back into the service corridor. She walked briskly toward the ballroom, her heart racing. She re-entered the Gold Coast room just as the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced over the PA system. "Please welcome the acting head of the Ricchetti family, Mr. Marco Conti." Polite applause. It was thin, uncertain. The room knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what yet. Marco stepped into the spotlight. He looked impeccable, projecting a somber gravitas. He approached the microphone, adjusting it with both hands. He looked out at the darkened room, unable to see the faces clearly. "Friends," Marco began, his voice dripping with rehearsed sorrow, "we gather tonight under a shadow. As many of you know, we have suffered a tragic loss. My brother, my mentor, Silvio." He paused for effect, hanging his head. It was a masterful performance. Silvio was a man of vision, Marco continued, and though he was taken from us too soon, by a tragic accident on a rainy road, his vision must survive. It falls to me, with a heavy heart, to carry that torch. From the back of the room, near the sound booth, Silvio signaled the technician. A man Enzo had paid triple his annual salary to look the other way for 5 minutes. "Carrying a torch is difficult." Silvio's voice boomed over the speakers, cutting Marco off mid-breath. Marco froze. He looked around, confused. "What? Is this a tribute?" "No," Silvio's voice continued, but this time it wasn't live. It was the recording Lauren had just captured. The audio quality was grainy but unmistakable. "The body is ash. The car exploded. The house burned to the foundation. He's dead. The transfer goes through as soon as I leave that stage." The ballroom went deathly silent. The recording continued. "And the girl, the vet, collateral. She's a loose end that tied itself." Marco stood on stage, his face draining of blood until he looked like a wax figure. He gripped the podium, his knuckles white. He looked up at the sound booth, panic flaring in his eyes. Then the spotlight moved. It swung away from the stage and swept across the floor, searching. It stopped in the center of the room. Silvio Ricchetti stood there. He held a glass of champagne in one hand, the other tucked casually in his pocket. He looked up at the stage, his expression bored, almost disappointed. "You never could improvise, Marco," Silvio said. He didn't need a microphone. His voice carried through the stunned silence of the room. Marco stumbled back from the podium. It's a trick. A deep fake. He's dead." "I look very alive for a ghost," Silvio said, taking a slow step forward. The crowd parted. They scrambled to get out of the way, creating a wide, clear path between the true Don and the usurper. "Security!" Marco screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Silvio. "Remove him! He's an imposter!" The security guards, the men Marco had paid, looked at Silvio. They looked at the calm, lethal confidence radiating off him. They looked at Marco, sweating and screaming on stage. In the Mafia, you don't bet on the hysterical man. You bet on the quiet one. The lead guard crossed his arms and stepped back against the wall. He did nothing. "No one is coming, Marco," Silvio said, walking closer. His footsteps on the marble echoed like gunshots. "You paid them with my money, but they know whose money it really is." Marco pulled a gun. It was a small silver pistol he had hidden in his waistband. A desperate, foolish move. Screams erupted from the crowd. Guests dove under tables. Silvio didn't flinch. He didn't even draw his own weapon. He just stopped walking and looked at the gun with disdain. "Put it down," Silvio said, "before you embarrass yourself further." "I killed you!" Marco shrieked, the veneer of the sophisticated consigliere shattering to reveal the frightened thug underneath. "I burned you." "You tried," Silvio corrected. "But you forgot the first rule of this family. You check the body." Silvio snapped his fingers. From the shadows of the wings, 3 men emerged. They weren't security. They were Silvio's personal guard. Enzo and 2 others who had been waiting in the ventilation shafts. They were armed with suppressed submachine guns. Marco looked left, then right. He was surrounded. "You have 2 choices," Silvio said, his voice dropping to a conversational volume that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "You can use that gun on yourself. Or you can come with Enzo." Marco looked at the gun in his hand. He looked at the crowd, witnessing his total humiliation. He looked at Silvio, who watched him with eyes devoid of mercy. Marco's hand shook. He couldn't do it. He dropped the gun. It clattered loudly on the stage floor. "Smart," Silvio said, "but cowardly. I expected nothing less." Enzo and the guards moved in. They didn't behead him. They didn't shoot him. They grabbed him by the arms and dragged him off the stage like a piece of unwanted luggage. Marco kicked and screamed, begging for the council to intervene. But the other dons watched in stony silence. The omertà had been broken. Marco was a rat and a failure. There was no sanctuary for him here. As Marco was hauled through the exit, Silvio stepped up onto the stage. He picked up the microphone Marco had abandoned. He looked out at the room, at the terrified socialites, the calculating mob bosses, the waiters frozen with their trays. "My apologies for the interruption," Silvio said smoothly. "There was a pest infestation. It has been handled." He raised his glass. "To family." The room hesitated for a heartbeat. Then, slowly, terrifyingly, the applause started. One person, then 10, then the whole room. They clapped for the victor. They clapped because they were afraid not to. "To family!" someone shouted. Silvio drank. He didn't smile. He looked over the rim of his glass, scanning the crowd until he found her. Lauren was standing near a pillar, half hidden by the shadows. She was trembling. She had seen violence before, animals fighting, nature's cruelty. But she had never seen this. She had never seen a man dismantle another human being's life with just words and a recording. She saw the way the room bowed to him. She saw the absolute, terrifying power he wielded. He wasn't a hero. He was a monster who had learned to wear a tuxedo, and she was the one who had opened the gate for him. Silvio's eyes locked onto hers. Across the ballroom, the connection was electric, heavy with adrenaline and blood. He nodded to her, a barely perceptible dip of his chin. "We did it." Lauren touched the ruby necklace at her throat. It felt colder now. She raised her own champagne glass, her hand shaking slightly, and took a sip. The wine tasted like vinegar. The words she'd heard through the hotel vent, collateral, dust, echoed under the applause, riding the heat of the spotlights and the smell of cordite. The music started again. The quartet played a waltz, frantic to cover the awkwardness of an attempted coup. The chatter resumed, louder and more manic than before. The world of the Mafia spun on, indifferent to the man who had just been dragged to his death. Silvio stepped off the stage and began to walk toward her. The crowd parted for him again, but this time they bowed their heads. He was the king of Chicago, risen from the ashes, and as he closed the distance, Lauren realized with a jolt of clarity that the dangerous part wasn't the car crash, or the fire, or the traitor. The dangerous part was that she didn't want to run away. She wanted to see what he would do next. "Dance with me," Silvio said when he reached her. It wasn't a question. Lauren set her glass down on a passing tray. She stepped into his arms. He pulled her close, his hand burning against the silk on her lower back. They moved together, swaying to the music, surrounded by enemies who were now pretending to be friends. "Is it over?" she whispered against his lapel. "The battle is over," Silvio murmured, his lips brushing her ear. The war is just beginning." He spun her, the burgundy dress flaring out like a pool of blood on the marble floor. And for the first time that night, Silvio Ricchetti smiled. It was the smile of a wolf who had just cleared the forest of competitors. "And you," he whispered, "were magnificent." Lauren closed her eyes, letting the music and the fear wash over her. She was alive. He was alive. And God help her, she had never felt more powerful. The silence inside the limousine on the ride back to Wacker Drive was heavy, not with the comfortable quiet of shared victory, but with the suffocating weight of things left unsaid. The city of Chicago blurred past the tinted windows, a streak of neon and rain-slicked asphalt, indifferent to the fact that its hierarchy had just been violently rearranged. Lauren Cole sat in the corner of the leather seat, the burgundy silk of her dress pooled around her like spilled wine. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the gala, through the confrontation with Marco, and through the terrifying waltz in the arms of a killer, was beginning to drain away. In its place was a bone-deep exhaustion and a trembling in her hands she couldn't quite suppress. She looked at Silvio. He was staring out the window, his jaw set in a line of granite. The warmth he had shown her on the dance floor, the possessive heat of his hand on her back, the whisper against her ear, had evaporated the moment the heavy doors of the Drake Hotel had closed behind them. He was no longer the partner who had needed her help to decipher shipping manifests. He was the Dawn. He was the man who had ordered his own brother dragged away to an unmarked grave without blinking. "You're quiet," Lauren said, her voice sounding too loud in the hermetically sealed cabin. Silvio didn't turn. "There is nothing left to say. The work is done." The coldness of his tone struck her like a physical blow. It wasn't angry. It was detached. Clinical. It was the voice of a surgeon closing a patient after a procedure, ready to wash his hands and move on to the next case. When the car pulled into the private underground garage of the penthouse tower, the transition was jarring. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Enzo opened the door. Silvio stepped out first, adjusting his cufflinks, his movements fluid and unhampered by the healing wound in his side. He didn't offer her his hand this time. Lauren stepped out onto the concrete, her heels clicking, echoing in the cavernous space. She followed him to the elevator, the silence stretching between them until it felt like a third passenger. The ride up to the penthouse took 40 seconds. Lauren watched the numbers tick upward, feeling a strange sense of vertigo. 3 weeks ago, she had come up here as a fugitive with a dying man. Now she was returning as a queen who had helped reclaim a kingdom. Yet she felt more precarious than ever. The elevator doors slid open. The penthouse was exactly as they had left it. The maps on the walls, the laptops humming on the kitchen island, but the energy had shifted. The war room atmosphere was gone, replaced by the sterile chill of a museum after hours. Silvio walked straight to the bar. He poured a single glass of amber liquid, whiskey, neat, and downed it in one swallow. He didn't pour one for her. He placed the heavy crystal glass down on the marble counter with a sharp clack, and finally turned to face her. "Enzo will be up in 10 minutes to collect the equipment," Silvio said. "You should change." Lauren stood in the center of the room, feeling foolish in her gown and diamonds. "Change? Is that it? We just go back to normal?" "There is no normal," Silvio corrected, his dark eyes flat and unreadable. "There is the mission, and there is the aftermath. The mission is complete. Marco is handled. The council has realigned. The threat to my life and yours is neutralized." "Neutralized," Lauren repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Is that what you call what happened to Marco?" "I call it necessary," Silvio said. He walked around the island, putting distance between them. He picked up a thick manila envelope that had been sitting next to his laptop. He held it for a moment, his thumb brushing over the seal, before sliding it across the marble surface toward her. "This is for you," he said. Lauren looked at the envelope. It was thick, substantial. "What is it?" "Payment," Silvio said. The word hung in the air, ugly and transactional. Lauren felt a flush of heat rise up her neck, born of humiliation and sudden, sharp anger. She walked to the counter and picked up the envelope. Her hands shook as she opened the clasp. She pulled out the contents. It wasn't cash. It was a stack of legal documents. On top was a deed for a property in Montana, a fully equipped state-of-the-art veterinary clinic with an attached residence on 40 acres of land. The price listed was astronomical, and it was marked paid in full. Beneath the deed was a passport. Lauren opened it. The photo was hers, taken from a security camera feed in the penthouse, she realized with a jolt. But the name was different. Elena Vance. "It's a clean identity," Silvio explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "Social security number, birth certificate, credit history. It goes back 10 years. It will stand up to scrutiny from anyone, the IRS, the FBI, even my world. The bank accounts linked to that name have enough funds to ensure you never have to work a day in your life, though I assumed you would want the clinic." Lauren stared at the passport. Elena Vance. A stranger with her face. "You want me to leave," she stated, looking up at him. "I want you gone," Silvio corrected, He crossed his arms over his chest, leaning back against the panoramic window, framing himself against the city lights he now owned. You were useful, Lauren. I won't deny that. Your skills, your adaptability, they were assets I needed while I was incapacitated. But I am no longer incapacitated. Useful, Lauren whispered. She dropped the passport onto the counter. Is that all I was? An asset? A nurse with a driver's license? Don't romanticize this, Silvio said, his voice hardening. You found me in a wreck. You saved me because it is your nature to fix broken things. I kept you alive because I needed cover. We made a deal. I told you I would give you the world if I lived. This, he gestured to the documents. This is the world. It's freedom. It's safety. It's everything you lost in that fire, multiplied by 10. It's a payoff, Lauren snapped, the anger finally breaking through. You're paying me off like a contractor you're done with. Because I am done with you, Silvio roared. The sudden volume made her flinch. He pushed off the window and stalked toward her, stopping only when the kitchen island was the only thing separating them. Look at me, Lauren. Look at what I am. I just executed my brother in front of 500 people. Tomorrow, I will order the deaths of a dozen more men who were loyal to him. My life is blood. It is violence. It is looking over my shoulder every second of every day until someone finally gets lucky and puts a bullet in my head. I know what you are, Lauren argued, leaning forward, matching his intensity. I've been living in it for 3 weeks. I washed the blood off your hands. I loaded your gun. I didn't run then. Why are you pushing me away now? Because you are a civilian, Silvio shouted, slamming his hand down on the marble. The sound echoed like a gunshot. You are a veterinarian who saves horses and cries over burnt houses. You do not belong here. You wore the dress, you played the part, and you did it well. But the play is over. The curtain is down. He took a breath, his chest heaving. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. You are a liability, Lauren. A weakness. Every enemy I have, and I have made new ones tonight, will look for a way to hurt me. And they will see you. They will see the way I looked at you on that dance floor. And they will come for you to get to me. So let them come, Lauren said, her voice shaking with a bravery that was bordering on recklessness. We handled Marco. We can handle... No, Silvio cut her off. I handled Marco. You survived him. There is a difference. I cannot run an empire if I am constantly worried about keeping you breathing. I cannot be what I need to be if I have a conscience sleeping in my bed. He looked at her with eyes that were cold, dead, and utterly convincing. You were a distraction. A pleasant one. But I have work to do, and I don't need a pet. The insult landed with precision. Lauren recoiled as if he had slapped her. She looked at him, searching for the man who had held her face in the elevator. The man who had told her she was a queen. He was gone. Or maybe he had never existed. Maybe this cold, brutal creature was the real Silvio Ricchetti, and the other man was just a fever dream born of trauma and painkillers. She straightened her spine. She reached up to her neck. Her fingers found the clasp of the ruby necklace. It took a moment. Her hands were trembling, but she undid the latch. The heavy necklace slid from her skin, pooling in her hands like drops of blood. She placed it gently on top of the dossier. The debt is paid, she said, her voice hollow but steady. You promised to replace what I lost. You've done that. The house, the clinic. It's more than fair. Silvio stared at the rubies. His jaw tightened, a small betraying tick that Lauren caught. But don't lie to me, Silvio, she said softly. You're not sending me away because I'm a liability. You're not sending me away because I'm a pet. She walked around the island until she was standing right in front of him. He didn't retreat, but his body was rigid, every muscle coiled tight. You're sending me away because you're terrified, she whispered. You're terrified that if I stay, you might actually feel something other than hate. You're scared that I make you human. And in your world, being human gets you killed. Silvio didn't speak. He didn't blink. He just stared at her, his face a mask of stone. Take the deal, Lauren, he rasped finally. Take the ticket. take the life, and get out of my city. I will, she said. I'm not stupid. I know when I'm not wanted, and I know when a patient is terminal. She stepped back, creating a chasm between them that felt wider than the miles to Montana. I'll be gone in the morning, she said. I assume Enzo will drive me to the airport? The plane is waiting at a private airfield, Silvio said, turning his back to her to pour another drink he didn't need. It leaves at 6 a.m. Don't miss it. I won't. Lauren turned and walked toward the guest room. She didn't slam the door. She closed it quietly, with a soft click that sounded like the final beat of a heart. Inside the room, the silence was deafening. Lauren leaned against the door, sliding down until she hit the floor. She didn't cry. She had cried enough in the truck. She just sat there, listening to the hum of the city outside, clutching the deed to a life she hadn't asked for, given by a man she was terrified she might have loved. In the main room, Silvio Ricchetti gripped the edge of the bar until his knuckles turned white. He stared at the ruby necklace on the counter. He reached out, his hand hovering over the gems, shaking slightly. He didn't pick them up. He couldn't bear to touch the warmth her skin had left on the metal. It's better this way, he whispered to the empty room. You're safe. He drank the whiskey. It burned, but not enough to numb the hole in his chest where his heart used to be. The morning came with a gray, relentless drizzle, fitting for a funeral or a departure. Lauren was awake long before the sun. She packed the few things she had. The clothes Silvio had bought her, the documents, the memories she couldn't leave behind. She left the burgundy dress hanging in the closet, a ghost of the woman she had been for one night. She walked out into the living area at 5:45 a.m. Silvio was there. He was sitting in the armchair facing the window, dressed in a fresh suit, reading a newspaper. He looked impeccable, untouched by the night. The car is downstairs, he said without looking up. Okay, Lauren said. She hesitated, her hand on the handle of her suitcase. Silvio. He lowered the paper slowly. He looked at her. His eyes were tired, red-rimmed, betraying the nonchalance of his posture. Thank you, she said. For saving my life. We are even, he said. Goodbye, Elena. He used the fake name. It was a deliberate cruelty, a way to sever the tie completely. He was telling her that Lauren Cole was dead, buried in the ashes of the farmhouse. Lauren flinched, but she nodded. Goodbye, Silvio. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. When the doors opened, she stepped inside and turned around. Silvio hadn't moved. He was staring at his paper, or pretending to. He didn't look up as the doors began to slide shut. Lauren watched the sliver of the penthouse disappear. The last thing she saw was his hand, gripping the paper so hard the paper tore. Then the doors closed, and she was dropping. Down, 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 away from the sky, away from the power, back to the earth where she belonged. Up in the penthouse, the moment the elevator mechanism clicked, signaling her descent, Silvio threw the glass of whiskey he had been nursing against the far wall. It shattered with a violent crash. Amber liquid and crystal shards sprang across the map of Chicago. He stood up and walked to the window, pressing his hand against the glass, looking down at the street 30 stories below. He watched as the black SUV pulled out of the garage and merged into the early morning traffic, heading west. Heading away, he watched until the taillights were swallowed by the rain and the distance. Be safe, Piccola, he whispered to the glass. He turned back to the room. It was huge. It was luxurious. It was the seat of absolute power in the city. And it was completely, devastatingly empty. Silvio Ricchetti walked to his desk. He sat down. He pulled a stack of files toward him, the list of Marco's associates who needed to be purged. He uncapped his pen. The king was back on his throne, and he had never felt more like a prisoner. The wind in Montana had a different voice than the wind in Chicago. In the city, the wind screamed against glass and steel, angry and trapped. Here, in the vast, white silence of the valley, it howled with a lonely, ancient sorrow that seeped through the walls of the clinic and settled deep in Lauren Cole's bones. 4 months. It had been 122 days since she had walked out of the elevator on Wacker Drive, leaving behind a shattered glass of whiskey and a man who had looked at her like she was a ghost he was trying to exorcise. Time hadn't really moved since then. It still lived in the smell of gasoline and wet drywall whenever she closed her eyes, in the memory of the way he'd looked at her as if trying to exorcise a ghost instead of the woman who had dragged him back from the edge. Lauren, or Elena Vance as the locals knew her, stood in the sterile operating theater of the clinic Silvio had bought for her. It was a magnificent facility, over-equipped and overfunded, a diamond dropped in the middle of cattle country. The heated floors, the digital X-ray machines, the recovery stalls padded with memory foam. It was every veterinarian's dream, and it felt exactly like what it was. A golden cage. She finished wrapping the leg of a border collie that had gotten tangled in a barbed wire fence. The dog, a stoic creature named Buster, thumped his tail weakly against the stainless steel table. "You're good to go, buddy," Lauren whispered, scratching him behind the ears. "Stay away from the fence lines, okay?" She carried the dog out to the waiting room, where an old rancher named Mr. Henderson was twisting his hat in his hands. He looked at Lauren with the same mixture of gratitude and curiosity that everyone in town seemed to have. Who was this woman who appeared out of nowhere with unlimited funds and hands that could stitch a vein with surgical precision? "What do I owe you, Miss Vance?" Mr. Henderson asked, reaching for a worn leather wallet. "Nothing," Lauren said, the standard answer she gave everyone. "Put it on the tab." There was no tab. There was no billing system. The operating costs of the clinic were paid automatically from a trust fund managed by a law firm in the Caymans. Every bottle of medicine, every kilowatt of electricity, every bag of feed was paid for by blood money. She was washing Silvio's conscience one healed animal at a time. Mr. Henderson frowned, uncomfortable with the charity. "That doesn't feel right, ma'am. Bring me a pie next week," Lauren said, forcing a smile that felt tight on her face. "Apple." Now when the rancher left, the silence returned, heavier than before. Lauren locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. It was only 4 p.m., but the winter sun was already dipping behind the sapphire mountains, painting the snow in shades of bruised purple and gray. She walked to the large window at the front of the clinic. The view was breathtaking. Acres of pristine pine forest and snow-covered pastures. It was the peace she had told herself she wanted. It was the safety Silvio had promised. And she hated it. She hated the quiet. She hated the safety. Every night, she lay in the king-sized bed in the attached residence, listening for the sound of an elevator, for the hum of a server, for the heavy tread of footsteps that meant danger and life. She missed the smell of ozone and expensive cologne. She missed the fear, because the fear had made her feel alive. She turned away from the window, intending to go to the back and sterilize instruments she hadn't even used, just to keep her hands busy. Then she heard it. It was a sound that didn't belong in this valley. It wasn't the rattle of a diesel pickup truck or the whine of a snowmobile. It was the low, throaty purr of a high-performance engine. Lauren froze. Her heart gave a single, violent kick against her ribs. She turned back to the window. A vehicle was coming up the long, winding driveway that she had shoveled by hand that morning. It was black. It was sleek. It was an armored SUV that looked like a scar against the white landscape. Panic flared, hot and sharp. Had Marco's loyalists found her? Had the clean identity failed? She looked around for a weapon. A scalpel. A sedative gun. Anything. But as the car pulled closer, slowing to a stop in front of the clinic, the panic dissolved into something else. Something terrified and hopeful and devastating. The engine cut. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out into the snow. He wasn't wearing a parka or heavy boots. He was wearing a long black wool coat over a dark suit, his Italian leather shoes sinking instantly into the powder. He looked ridiculous. He looked magnificent. It was Silvio. He stood by the car for a moment, looking up at the clinic, his breath puffing in white clouds in the frigid air. He looked tired. The arrogance that had armored him at the Unity Gala was gone, replaced by a weary tension in his shoulders. He looked thinner, his cheekbones sharper, his eyes shadowed. Lauren couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She just watched him walk to the door. He didn't knock. He tried the handle. Locked. He looked through the glass. He saw her standing there in her scrubs, paralyzed. He didn't gesture for her to open it. He just waited. He waited with the patience of a man who had no other destination. Lauren walked to the door. Her hand trembled as she unlocked the deadbolt. The sound was loud in the empty room. She pushed the door open. The cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and snow and him. "You're hard to find, Elena," Silvio said. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in days. "You knew exactly where I was," Lauren replied, her voice shaking. "You bought the map. I bought the land," he corrected. "I didn't know if you would still be on it." He stepped inside. He didn't ask for permission. He closed the door behind him, shutting out the wind. The silence that fell between them was electric, charged with 4 months of unsaid words. "What are you doing here, Silvio?" Lauren asked, wrapping her arms around herself. She felt suddenly underdressed in her simple blue scrubs and messy bun. "Is there a problem with the identity? Did someone find me?" "No one found you," Silvio said. He unbuttoned his coat but didn't take it off. He looked around the waiting room, taking in the clean lines, the expensive chairs, the peace. "The identity is perfect. Elena Vance is a ghost in the system." "Then why?" "Because the system works," Silvio said, looking back at her. "But I don't." He took a step toward her. "I haven't slept in 4 months, Lauren. I have the city. I have the power. Marco is a memory. The council eats out of my hand. I have everything I was supposed to want." "Congratulations," she said bitterly. "You won." "I lost," he said. The admission was quiet, brutal. "I sat in that penthouse every night, looking at the city, and all I could see was the empty space where you used to stand. I drank enough whiskey to drown a fleet, but I couldn't drown the silence you left behind. You sent me away," Lauren reminded him, tears pricking her eyes. "You told me I was a liability. You told me I was a pet." "I lied," Silvio rasped. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He stopped just inches away, close enough that she could see the gray hairs that had appeared at his temples, close enough to feel the heat radiating from him. "I lied to you because I was terrified," he confessed, stripping away the armor of the dawn. "I thought if I sent you here, to this fortress of snow and safety, you would be untouched. I thought I could keep you pure if I kept you far away from my filth." "I never asked to be pure," Lauren whispered. "I asked to be with you." "I know," Silvio said. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, trembling slightly. "But I couldn't risk it. Not then. I needed to know the war was over. I needed to know I could build walls strong enough to hold us." "And now?" she asked. "Is the war over?" "The war is never over," Silvio said. "But the battlefield has changed." He reached into his coat pocket. For a second, Lauren's muscle memory tensed, expecting a weapon or a dossier. But he pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't legal-sized. It was a brochure. He handed it to her. Lauren opened it. It was a prospectus for the Richetti Foundation. "What is this?" she asked. "It's the future," Silvio said. "Over the last 4 months, I have liquidated the drug routes. I sold the gambling dens to the Russians. I cut the ties with the cartels. It cost me half my fortune and nearly a mutiny. But it is done." Lauren looked up at him, stunned. You dismantled the business?" "I legitimized it," Silvio corrected. "We still run the unions, the construction, the shipping logistics. But the cargo is real now. No more ghost shipments. No more blood money." He took a deep breath, looking at her with a vulnerability that broke her heart. "I cannot undo the things I have done, Lauren. I cannot bring back the dead, but I can change the direction of the river. I realized that protecting you didn't mean sending you away. It meant building a world where you didn't have to hide." He took the brochure from her hand and tossed it onto the reception desk. He didn't care about the paper. He cared about her. "I don't want a pet," he said, his voice dropping to a growl. "And I don't want a liability. I want a partner. I want someone who can look at a spreadsheet and see the lies. I want someone who can stand in a room full of sharks in a burgundy dress and make them afraid to bleed." He reached out and finally touched her. His warm hand cupped her jaw, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I came here to ask you a question, he said. And if the answer is no, I will walk out that door, get in my car, and you will never see me again. I will leave you to this peace you hate. What is the question? Lauren breathed, leaning into his touch. My soul is black, Lauren, Silvio whispered. I have done terrible things. I am stubborn, I am dangerous, and I am damaged. But I am yours, if you will have me. So, do you still know how to treat lost causes? Lauren looked at him. She saw the monster and the man. She saw the scar on his side that she had healed, and the scars on his conscience that she had soothed. She saw the only person in the world who made her feel visible. A smile broke through her tears. Not a polite smile, but a real, radiant thing. You're not a lost cause, Silvio, she said, echoing the words she had spoken months ago in a snowy parking lot. You're just incredibly high maintenance. Silvio let out a breath that sounded like a laugh, a sound of pure relief. He pulled her to him, his other arm wrapping around her waist, crushing her against his chest. Then fix me, he whispered. He kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss at the gala, which had been a performance for an audience. And it wasn't like the almost kisses in the penthouse, which had been restrained by duty. This was a collision. It was desperate and hungry, tasting of winter and longing. It was the breaking of a dam. Lauren buried her hands in his hair, pulling him closer, anchoring him. She felt the cold of his coat and the heat of his skin. She felt the gun he still wore, because old habits died hard, but she didn't care. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Silvio rested his forehead against hers. Pack a bag, he ordered softly. Where are we going? Lauren asked, though she already knew. Home, Silvio said. Chicago. We have a board meeting on Monday, and I believe the foundation needs a chairwoman. Lauren looked over his shoulder at the empty, perfect clinic. What about the animals? We'll hire a staff, Silvio said immediately. The best vets money can buy. We'll turn this place into a sanctuary. You can run it from the city. But you belong with me. Yes, Lauren said. I do. 1 year later, the charity gala for the Richetti Foundation was the event of the season in Chicago. The ballroom of the Palmer House was packed with the city's elite. Mayors, senators, philanthropists. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh lilies. It had been a full year since they'd walked back into Chicago together and turned a war room into a boardroom, rewriting supply chains and laundering blood into clean contracts. Somewhere far north, the Montana sanctuary she had once called a cage now ran under a full staff of vets she'd handpicked herself, its monthly reports stacked neatly on her desk in the city. Silvio Richetti stood on the edge of the dance floor, holding a glass of sparkling water. He wore a tuxedo, but the tension that used to define his posture was gone. He still looked dangerous. That would never fade. But the edge was sharper, cleaner. He wasn't a mob boss hiding in plain sight anymore. He was a tycoon who had rewritten the rules of the game. He wasn't watching the crowd. He was watching his wife. Lauren stood near the center of the room, speaking to the governor. She wasn't wearing burgundy tonight. She was wearing emerald green velvet, a gown that draped elegantly over her changing shape. She was 6 months pregnant. One hand rested unconsciously on the swell of her stomach as she laughed at something the governor said. She looked radiant, powerful. She held court not with fear, but with a charisma that drew people in. Enzo, now the head of legitimate security for the corporation, stepped up beside Silvio. The perimeter is clear, boss, Enzo said quietly. No threats, just donors. Good, Silvio said, not taking his eyes off Lauren. Let's keep it that way. Lauren looked up, sensing his gaze. She excused herself from the governor and walked toward him. The crowd parted for her, respectful and admiring. You look tired, Silvio said as she reached him, his hand immediately going to her waist to support her. My feet ache, she admitted, leaning into him. And your son is using my bladder as a trampoline. Silvio smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. He placed his large hand over hers on her stomach. He has my energy, Silvio said. He has your stubbornness, Lauren corrected. He refused to move for the ultrasound tech for 20 minutes. He knows what he wants, Silvio said proudly. He's a Richetti. He's a Cole, Lauren countered. Which means he's going to be smart enough to stay out of trouble. We can hope, Silvio murmured. He kissed her temple. Are you happy, Lauren? Lauren looked out at the room. She saw the faces of people they had helped through the foundation. She saw the legitimate empire they had built from the ashes of the old one. She thought of the nursery waiting in the penthouse. Painted soft yellow, far away from the darkness of the past. She looked up at her husband, the man who had crashed into her house and stolen her life, only to give her a bigger one in return. I'm not just happy, she whispered. I'm home. Silvio tightened his arm around her. Come. Let's go. You need to rest. The speeches aren't over, she protested weakly. I'm the chairman, Silvio said, with a grin that was all wolf. I say the speeches are over. He guided her toward the exit, ignoring the disappointed looks of the guests who wanted more of their time. They walked out of the ballroom, past the security, and into the cool Chicago night. The car was waiting. Not an armored escape vehicle, but a family car with a car seat base already installed in the back. As Silvio opened the door for her, Lauren paused. She looked at the city skyline, glittering against the dark. It was a jungle, yes, but she wasn't prey anymore. She was the lioness walking beside the lion. She got into the car. Silvio closed the door, solid and safe, and walked around to the driver's side. He got in, started the engine, and took her hand across the console. Ready? He asked. Lauren squeezed his hand. Drive. And as they merged into the traffic, leaving the ghosts of the past behind them, the future stretched out ahead,